Lord, we are so thankful to be here today. And God, I do pray that as we read your word and as we go through this passage, that, Lord, again, watching this man walk through trial, I think things that could be really devastating. I pray that you would speak to our hearts, Lord. Some of us are in hard circumstances. We're in difficult places. And I know that some of us, we're in a place we never even dreamt we'd be in. And God, it's hard and it's tough. And I pray that by watching Paul and by learning from him, Lord, that it would give us the faith and the, quote, courage we need to face that. But most of all, we would understand, God, of your faithfulness. Lord, that no matter what, no matter even what lie we're told in our head, that you remain faithful. The Bible says even when we're faithless, you remain faithful. So touch hearts today, draw us close to you, and God, let us hear with our heart, hear with our head, and Lord, just be encouraged in life. And we pray these things in Jesus' name, amen. Hey, as we're watching now Paul, I'm amazed at Paul's attitude. I'm amazed at what he does here at the end of the book of Acts. I'm going to do a little bit of review just to catch us up. So if you haven't been here, you'll be caught up. If you have been here, maybe you fell asleep and you get caught up. But listen, as we're going through this, I got to tell you, I'm amazed at Paul because of this. Do you remember a few months ago for us, when he was in Asia, all he could think about was getting to Jerusalem. I got to get to Jerusalem. And I got to take that offering. I got to kind of, quote, bring the church together with that offering from the Gentiles to the Jewish believers, that they would come together and he would build that unity. And he was laser focused on that. And that was his heart. That's what he wanted to do. I don't know. Have you ever been on a trip or get ready to go on a trip and you're lasered that way, man? And you have expectations, right? When you get there, it's going to be so awesome and so good. And you're going to see God do some amazing things. And then listen, on the way, people are telling him it's not going to be good when you get there, bro. You're going to have some hard times, difficult things are going to happen. You're going to get put in prison, etc. And you still push forward because you know that's what God wants you to do. And you end up, and from the moment he got to Jerusalem, everything went south. Think about his meeting with the church. He gets together with the church. And again, he had to be excited. He took him a large gift. And he had to be excited about that. And how did they respond? Oh, Paul, there's some people here that they think you're not quite Jewish enough. And you've left, our roots. And you speak against the temple. And you speak against the law of Moses. So to appease them, why don't you go with these brothers who have taken a vow, pay their offering, take care of them, go in a temple, and everybody will know it's okay. So what does Paul do? Okay, I'll do that. It's not that big a deal. I'll do that. And he goes in the temple, and what happens? He's misunderstood, and they think that he took a Gentile in there. Now, man, things explode. A riot starts happening. Remember, it said they were going to tear him apart, and Claudius Lysias, the commander, shows up, rescues him. He does a little bit of crowd surfing, gets him to the steps, and then Paul says, oh, wait a minute. There's a huge crowd here. Can I say something? Right? And that's Paul, man. He's wanting to share the word, and he shares the word, and then they get even more fired up and crazy. And then listen, he takes them inside, and then he says, we got to bring Claudius, we got to bring the other guys in. So the Sanhedrin shows up. He's before them, gives his defense. They reject it. Everything goes chaotic from there. And then listen, and then the commander gets word that these guys are going to kill him. Remember, they laid an ambush, and Paul's nephew came and said, hey, you got to get Paul out of here, right? Oh, I left out an important part. Jesus showed up and talked to Paul, remember? And Jesus came and he said, Paul, what are you doing in Jerusalem? I never wanted you here in the first place. And that's why you're going through all these things, and that's why your life's falling apart. That's what some of us think. No, what did Jesus tell him? You're exactly where I want you to be. That's so all the naysayers who said he shouldn't have gone there, they're wrong. Jesus said, this is where you need to be, right? And he said, just as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you will testify for me in Rome. And Paul went, boom, shakalaka. Right? And so then They sneak him out at night, get him to Caesarea. And I got to think, now at this point, I got to think Paul is thinking in his head, finally, this ordeal's got to be over. And they sent, remember, Claudius sent a letter saying, here's what happened. I sent him to you, Felix, the governor, and I want you to take care of it. So the guys come from Jerusalem and they tell a bunch of lies about Paul, give no evidence, and then Paul speaks, and Felix basically says, well, I don't have a reason to keep you, but I'm not gonna let you go either. I'm going to kind of keep this up in the air for a while. And when Claudius, I'll send for Claudius, and when he comes, we'll sort this whole matter out, and I'll find out what really happened. Here's what I'm thinking. Remember last week we talked about it. Claudius already wrote a letter. He knows what Claudius thinks. So he's just stalling. Then 2 years, think about that. 2 years, you're not convicted of anything. You're not really under arrest, but you are under arrest because you can't go wherever you want to go. I've always found that you're under arrest when you can't get out of places, right? I remember getting put in a cell one time and you can't get out. And a friend of mine goes, we're not in a cell. I go, yeah, we are. Open that door. When you can't get out, you're in a cell. You're locked up. And so listen, he's there, and 2 years. I want you to think about what you were doing 2 years ago. Some of us go, I don't have a clue what I was doing 2 years ago. Most of us are that way, right? Do you know what we were doing 2 years ago today? Do you know what book we were studying 2 years ago? Wasn't Acts. Somebody said Acts. Seems like it for some. We were studying Romans. Actually, we were studying Romans chapter 7. That's kind of interesting, huh? So some of you now think, man, that seems like forever, right? That's Paul. 2 years. And that's where we pick it up. Felix, remember, was called back to Rome, stripped of all of his power, stripped of all of his wealth, stripped of everything. He's in serious trouble. And we were introduced last week to the new guy, Festus, right? Porcius Festus. So now he's on the scene. Now here's what I'm thinking. Maybe something will get done, especially if you're Paul. I'm impatient. 2 years seems like eternity, right? 2 days is a long time. Usually 2 hours if you're waiting for something. I was just with Robert Furrow this week, and he goes, dude, you are so impatient. And listen, he's got like zero patience. So I'm in the negative bracket of that whole thing. You know, I don't have zero, I got negative something. And then Robert does this to me, man, I'm doing it and I get anxious about something and I start, fidgeting and doing things, and he always does this. Does that help, Pat? I go, why don't you just shut up, man? Just sit over there and be quiet and leave me alone. But man, I just can't imagine 2 years would be horrible. How many of us, you don't have to raise your hand or anything, how many of us at that point would feel like Jesus has forgotten us? God doesn't care anymore. How many of us at that point would think, this is not fair? Have you ever said that? This is not fair. Why is this happening to me? This is not fair. Now let's check out, let's see what happens. So here he is, he's with Festus, and then verse 1 of chapter 25 says, now when Festus had come to the province, after 3 days he went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem. Now here's what I like, man. 3 days and he's on it. Festus, listen, I think Festus is thinking, what I got this guy in jail for? And Felix says, I don't know why he's in jail. I just couldn't think of anything else to do. And I didn't want to make people mad. So I put him in jail. So you deal with it. Now Festus has got to deal with this thing. So here's what I think he's doing. I'm going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to figure out what exactly happened. I want to get to the bottom of it. By the way, Festus, according to Josephus, I don't know if you know much. Josephus is a first century historian that left us a lot of good records, but you always need to be careful. Whenever I hear some Christians quote Josephus like he's gospel, you need to know this about Josephus. He was a traitor. He was a Jewish person who was a traitor to the Roman government during the 70 AD war. He's not a great guy, right? But he gave us some history. He says that this Festus, in his writings, he says Festus was a good guy, not great guy, but a good guy. Anybody taking the place of Felix would look good, right? If you got a real tyrant and horrible individual, the next guy's going to look okay. But nonetheless, he wants to get to the bottom of it, and because I checked out and read ahead a little bit. This guy knows nothing about Judaism or Christianity. I think he's been living in a hole for a while. I mean, the questions and things he asks, I'm thinking, dude, where have you been? Is your social media down or something? Did you guys know zero information? So listen, he goes up to Jerusalem after 3 days. Verse 2, then the high priest and the chief men of the Jews informed him against Paul, and they petitioned him, asking a favor against him, that he would summon him to Jerusalem while they lay in ambush along the road to kill him. Does this sound a little bit familiar? Deja vu, right? Groundhog Day, whatever you want to call it, man. I think Paul is going, why does this stuff keep happening over and over? So here these guys have a plan. And they're saying, what we're going to do is, hey, Festus, just bring him up to Jerusalem. And then their plan is, we're going to execute him on the way. We're going to take care of it. Here's what I'm thinking. 2 years ago, they started this plot to kill Jesus, to kill Paul. 2 years ago. Do you see what happens when bitterness gets a hold of your heart? You can't think of anything else. These guys are so focused on, we've got to annihilate this guy. We've got to get rid of him. We've got to rid the earth of him, that now they're plotting again. Now listen, I don't think it could be the same guys who were plotting before, but I think they're all dead because they weren't going to eat until they killed Paul, right? And that was 2 years ago, so if they weren't eating, they're dead. But listen, that's a little bit of sarcasm. I think they probably broke that fast, right? But man, listen, man, they got this plan. Now, Festus doesn't know this plan. Festus doesn't even really know some of the history. And so they're saying, hey, can you bring him up? Now, you got to give the guy credit, although that went in the back of his mind. So let's just kind of take a break for a moment. This is in the back of Festus's mind. We could settle this in Jerusalem, okay? But he doesn't want to do that right now. So look at what he says. Listen, verse 4 says, but Festus answered that Paul should be kept in Caesarea and that he himself was going there shortly. Here's what he says. We're going to take care of this in Caesarea. Why? Why did he say that? Because Festus is not a religious judge. Festus is a civil judge. He's part of the Roman government. He's only got authority over civil things. He doesn't, remember, Rome let the Jews run the temple and do things in the temple. They gave them that authority. It's kind of like today, Israel gives Jordan the authority on the Temple Mount. And they have that authority, although they're obviously, it's not in Jordan, but they let them run that area up on the Temple Mount. So listen, same thing here. So Rome didn't have that. And he goes, here's what's up. This guy's under my watch. We're going back to Caesarea. That's where we're going to do the trial. Now, I kind of like that, right? I don't like that about him. So he's not going to get duped by the ambush. And then it says, verse 5, therefore, he said, let those who have authority among you go down with me and accuse the man to see if there's any fault within him. So again, I'm thinking they just told you what they wanted to do, as far as the fault with Paul. And now you're going to try him again? Do you know this is the third time Paul has been in front of the Sanhedrin? Come on. That's ridiculous, isn't it? That's kind of like, we're going to try you and try you and try you till we can convict you. And something to me that kind of blows my mind in this section. At this time, the Roman government, their judicial system during the time where Paul's going through all this, was running like clockwork. It was a well-oiled machine. You got to understand that. This is highly unusual circumstance for that system. So that kind of says something about who's involved here, right? It's the Lord. And then, listen, it's the Lord getting Paul where he needs to get. So you guys come up there. We're going to do this one more time and see if we find any fault. Verse 6, and when he had remained among them more than 10 days, he went down to Caesarea. Now, listen, 2 years and 3 days plus more than 10 days, 2 years and 13 days Paul's been waiting. They tacked another 13. I would be nuts. I would be crazy. Right? Now, why did you spend 10 days in Jerusalem? Were you shopping? What's going on? How come we didn't just come right back and get this done, right? More than 10 days, he came back in the middle of verse 6, went down to Caesarea, and the next day, sitting on a judgment seat, he commanded Paul to be brought. Now, those who have been to Israel with us and those who are going have something to look forward to. This is exciting to me. When you think about those of us who have been to Israel, I think about that theater there in Caesarea, and it's a beautiful theater, and you're just looking out over the Mediterranean, gorgeous spot. And here's what I'm thinking, man. And you got Festus coming out sitting on his, big seat, I'm going to judge. And Paul coming out of that dungeon area that's down below and coming up with chains on that he hasn't done anything. And he brings Paul, and then now the Jewish guys are kind of parading in with all of their junk on, and they're coming in and they're coming after Paul. And here's Paul in chains. And he didn't do anything. How many of us at that point, God, this isn't fair. This is bumming me out. How come I have to go through this? Now, some of the things we go through are our own decisions. And this isn't Paul's decision. Why is he going through this? Well, I'm sure God had to do some work in Paul's life before he went to Rome. I'm sure there was some things that needed to be straightened out for him. But I also know that God is in control of this situation. So listen, they come out, verse 7, and when he had come, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood about and laid many serious complaints against Paul. Check this out, which they could not prove. Doesn't that stink? Doesn't that sound like deja vu? Didn't this just happen with Felix? Didn't it just happen when he was in Jerusalem in front of him? Listen, people are standing up and saying things, and hey, anybody can stand up anywhere and say whatever they want about somebody. Doesn't make it true. And they're making these accusations, and here's what's crazy. They can't prove it. Now, if I'm Festus, I'm going to go, you know what, let's just shut this kangaroo court down. This is stupid. We're done. We're done. If you can't prove it, I'm going to release this guy and let him go. Well, Paul speaks up first. Listen, I love what he says. If I was speaking up, if I was Paul and I was speaking up, I wouldn't be polite. Paul's very polite. I would be calling them liars, thieves. I'd be saying their pants are on fire, right? And these guys are horrible, man. Listen, Paul, it says, while he answered for himself in verse 8, neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I offended in anything at all. Listen, they laid many serious accusations. That's what Luke records. Here's what that's saying. They're bringing up stuff that deserve the death penalty. Here's what Paul answers. 3 things, very clear. I broke no Jewish religious laws. I didn't do anything in the temple, and I've not broken any civil laws. That's what he's letting them know. There's no proof I haven't done that. Now that should be end of discussion, right? We're done. Hey, here it is. They have no proof. They're making these accusations, and he doesn't yell and scream at them. He just says, I haven't done that. All 3 areas that he would be responsible for, he says, I didn't do any of these things. So Festus, being Festus, here's the problem with Festus. Look at verse 9. But Festus, wanting to do the Jews a favor. Oh, you're one of those politicians. You see, he's a man pleaser, right? And most politicians are. They're going to tell you what you want to hear. They're going to try and please you. They're going to try and do things. And I don't know if you've lived any time at all, you know that you can't please everybody, right? You kind of just have to make a decision. I'm not going to please everybody, so I got to go with what's right. But he wants to please the Jews. Why did Felix leave him in prison? Because he wanted to please the Jews. Listen how powerful the Jews were at that time in the Roman government. So because he wants to please the Jews, now he goes back, he remembers, oh, those guys wanted me to take him to Jerusalem. Maybe we could do that and everybody would be happy. So listen what he says, because he wanted to please the Jews, verse 9. He answered Paul and said, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and be there and there be judged before me concerning these things? Here's what Festus says. I know, let's take a road trip. Let's go to Jerusalem. And when we get to Jerusalem, I'll be the judge and you can stand in trial before me. Now, what's wrong with that? There's a lot of things wrong with that. Number 1, Festus has no authority in Jerusalem. Oh, how's he going to go stand and be the judge? He's just kind of like talking out his ear right now. because he wants to please somebody. He can't go there and judge. Number two, why does he have to take it? Isn't Paul before him right now? Why does he have to go to Jerusalem and be tried? Aren't the Jews there? Here's what I'm thinking, man. This is so crazy. If I was Paul, now I'm coming undone, right? I'm going to tell him he's crazy. I'm going to tell him the whole thing is a sham, and I'm going to throw my chains at him and leave. Right? So listen to what Paul does. You notice that Paul has so much self-control. Does that blow your mind? My Bible tells me, this is for me, not for you guys. My Bible tells me that part of the fruit of the Spirit is self-control. Yeah? I mean, come on, get a grip. Get a hold of yourself, right? It's like, man, I love this. So listen, so Paul said, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat where I ought to be judged. Here's what he's saying. Everything that's been brought up against me is supposed to be civil. I'm where I need to be judged. I'm in the right place. We don't need to go to Jerusalem. And to the Jews, I've done no wrong. Listen carefully, as you very well know. Festus, you know I haven't done anything. I mean, this has got to be frustrating for him. Number one, the long wait. Number two, having things twisted and turned. But the worst part is, nobody will make a decision. He's saying, listen, you know I haven't done anything, Festus. These guys are standing here and they got no proof. Why are we going on with this? So he's not quite done. Listen, verse 11, for if I am an offender or have committed anything deserving death, I do not object to dying. Do you hear what he's saying? That tells you how serious the charges were. Here's what he's saying, man. If I did something that deserves death, I'm willing to die for it. You know, the old saying, don't do the crime if you can't do the time, right? I'll do it. I'm not afraid of that. But, listen, if there is nothing in these things which these men accuse me, no one can deliver me to them. If I'm innocent, you can't give me to these guys. Paul knows, man, I get to Jerusalem, I'm done. If I get there, these guys are either going to, I think he's thinking, kill me on the way or kill me once I get there. You can't deliver me to them. And then he drops the bomb, right? Man, he throws out the Trump card. Not our current Trump, but that saying's kind of lost it for a while. But man, listen what he throws out there. Don't you love this? Listen, he says, I appeal to Caesar. Wow. That's it. That's end of discussion. Now here's what's crazy. He's appealing to Caesar, but he's not convicted of anything. Usually when you appeal, you're appealing the conviction that you're given, right? Are you guys with me? He hasn't been convicted. And I'm thinking, well, this is nuts. Now, every Roman has a right to do that. And it's interesting, you read some commentaries, and, that's why sometimes, man, those guys drive me nuts. They're like, some of the stuff they do, I'm going, seriously? Some people go, he should have never done this. Why not? Why shouldn't have he done that? Listen, Christians, sometimes we lay down and get mowed over by things when we could use the law for our benefit to help us. Romans chapter 13 tells us that God instituted governments and authority for people who do good. If you do evil, you're afraid of the law, right? Like, I don't usually freak out when I see police officers. I don't like to start running, unless sometimes when I'm driving. But usually I see a police officer, I'm fine with it, right? But if I was guilty of something, I'd be starting to freak out. You see a police officer, you start sweating and start doing things. So listen, you can use the law also for your benefit. That's what the judges are there for. That's what Paul is doing. Paul is saying, this has gone far enough. Listen, I don't think he's just thinking, here's my ticket to Rome, although it is his ticket to Rome. Here's what I think he's thinking. This is stupid. This is the most idiotic thing I've ever been through. I have been on trial formally 3 different times, informally 2 other times. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to let this go on. It's not going to continue. I appeal to Caesar. So he throws that bomb out, and now Festus has to deal with that. And listen what he says, verse 12. Then Festus, when he had conferred with the council, isn't it interesting? Finally, he talks to somebody, right? You have appealed to Caesar at the end of verse 12, so to Caesar you shall go. Now, once again, I'm thinking, all right, let's get on the boat. Verse 13, after some days, seriously? We're still hanging out here. Some days. In a minute, we're going to read many days. Listen, I think it's months, man. After he appeals to Caesar, it's still months before anything happens. That's nuts. So after some days, look who shows up, man. After some days, King Agrippa and Bernice came to Caesarea to greet Festus. Now, here's what's going on. These guys, listen, he's a new governor. This is a king, right? And it was more of a figurehead, not actual ruling, but it looked good. And he shows up. Do you know who Agrippa is? Do you know what family Agrippa's from? The Herods. Oh, joy. Right? I'm thinking if I'm Paul, I'm going, oh, I am so glad these guys showed up. A little bit of history. I gave some last time. A little bit of history about the Herods. His great-grandfather was Herod the Great. Herod the Great was probably one of the most ruthless, horrible individuals that ever lived. He murdered 2 of his wives, murdered his mother-in-law. No comments. Murdered 2 of his sons. As a matter of fact, people said it's better to be Herod's pig than one of his sons. He was a horrible, horrible, horrible man. When he knew he was going to die, he told them, the minute he quits breathing, you slaughter, and he arrested 45 Jews. You kill these 45 Jews, so wailing will go out for them, and I'll take it. That's how bad. This guy's a bad guy, bad man, horrible man, except he was a great builder. He was called Herod the Great because of his building. He built Caesarea. He built the aqueduct that goes from Caesarea to Jerusalem. He built the retaining wall. He built the Temple Mount. He built Masada. He's an incredible builder, right? So he's got that. So Herod the Great, that's this guy's great-grandfather. Oh, and then his grandfather, Aristobulus, he didn't do a lot because Herod killed him. So when this guy's when his dad's a little guy, his grandfather gets offed by his great-grandfather. Isn't this a nice family? Oh, by the way, Herod married some of his relatives and his grandfather also. So listen, now you got this going on. And then his uncle, Herod Antipas, is the one that beheaded John. Remember, there was the Herod that John came and said, why are you married to your sister-in-law? And he goes, I don't like you anymore. I'm going to cut your head off. Right? Bottom line, the sister-in-law didn't like him. So he kills John the Baptist. Then his dad, Herod Agrippa, Herod Agrippa the first is the one who killed James, as James was martyred. And then he's the one, wasn't it, chapter 12, I think, when he went out and he met everybody and he was telling everybody how great he was, and then he fell down and worms ate him, right? That's his dad. So now you get to this guy. So that's his background. Now you get to him, and who did he show up with? Did you pick up who he showed up with? A lady named Bernice. Well, that was his mother's name, his grandmother's name was Bernice. And I was with this lady, Bernice. Do you know who Bernice is? It's his sister. You guys are like, not shocked? I'm a little shocked. I'm not used to those kind of relationships, right? It's a little weird. He's with his sister. Oh, and do you remember Drusilla, who was with Felix? That's their sister too. So Drusilla and Priscilla, I was going to say, Drusilla and Bernice are sisters. And Bernice, listen, divorced her first husband, who, by the way, was her uncle, to come and go with Agrippa. You kind of get the idea, like the Herod family tree went straight up, no branches. Kind of one of those things, right? It's a weird. Now think about what's going on. These 2 people come. You're Paul, and you're thinking, seriously, this is who's going to convict me? This is insane. It's nuts. So they show up. Now, listen, they show up and they're there to encourage Festus. Festus just got a new office. They're there. So now we got all that background going on, right? Now, didn't it make you feel so much better? You think Hollywood writes weird movies? Just read your Bible, man. You can't make this stuff up, right? Then verse 14, so when they were there, when they had been there many days. So after some days, and then when they had been there many days, it's not he's been there for months, right? He's waiting for things, and I don't know what they were doing for many days. It says, after they were there many days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, now before we get into this, here's what's going on. Festus can't really make a decision, and here's his problem. He's trying to send Paul to Rome, but here's the issue. He's got no charges against him. So how do you send a guy to be tried before Caesar that you got no charges? Now he's in a dilemma, right? Yeah, he says, you're going to go to Caesar, but I got to write something, and I can't write just these guys came and accused him. So I know I'll ask one of the immoral guys, right? Who obviously they could come up with a good lie because look at their lives. So here he's going to lay everything out before the king. Also, he's not real familiar. The Herods, they were pretty familiar with Judaism and Christianity. They had some Jewish blood. But listen to their history of Christianity. Since great-grandfather, they have tried to eliminate this thing called Christianity, right? His grandfather tried to kill all the babies, remember, 2 and younger when Jesus was born. And then Antipas tried to get rid of John. And then Herod Agrippa I beheading James. Listen, they're anti-Christian, there's no doubt about it. So they've got to know something about it. So I know I'll talk to Agrippa, he'll give me something to say. So now he lays out the case, and we'll just kind of read it because we've already kind of gone through it. At the end of verse 14, he says, there's a certain man left a prisoner by Felix, about whom the chief priests and the elders of the Jews informed me when I was in Jerusalem, asking for a judgment against him. So to them I answered, it is not the custom of Romans to deliver any man to destruction. Are you kind of getting that? To a death penalty. And we don't just give someone up that's a Roman citizen to death penalty before the accused meets the accusers face to face and has an opportunity to answer for himself concerning the charges against him. So listen, he's done that like multiple times. Therefore, when they had come together without any delay, the next day I sat on the judgment seat and commanded the man to be brought in. And when the accuser stood up, they brought up no accusation against him of such things as I suppose. Listen what Festus is saying. I thought they were going to give me something. They gave me nothing. Then why didn't you let him go? Why is he still being held? What's the matter with you, doofus? Right? I mean, come on, this is like nuts. Well, they didn't bring up anything I thought they were going to. And then listen, man, listen to this caveat. Well, they didn't bring up anything as I suppose. Look at verse 19. But they had some questions against him about their own religion, which he doesn't, listen, I don't know anything about Judaism. How can I judge that? And then get the kicker here. And about a certain Jesus who had died, whom Paul affirmed was alive. Seriously, guy, a certain Jesus? That's what you got? Listen, anybody alive at that time had to know about Jesus, unless you lived in a hole. Unless your Facebook account got frozen and your Twitter account's down. And I mean, listen, he should have that information. He should know. And he doesn't know. I'm thinking this guy was so out of touch with what was going on, period, that he's a mess. A certain guy. But then here's what else I think. Do you remember when Paul was on trial, he would talk generally about the resurrection according to what Luke told us? You know what I know he did because of this? Here's what I know he did. I know he talked about the resurrection of Jesus. Why? Because they're accusing him of it. He's talking about this dead guy who Paul affirms is alive. Listen, in all of this mess, Paul kept the gospel going forward. He didn't give up. Man, I love that, don't you? Listen, and you need to understand something. The resurrection is crucial to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Crucial. We can't leave it out. Listen, you can talk to people, go out on the street, you can talk to people about the birth of Jesus. They don't have a problem with that. Hey, how many ungodly people celebrate Christmas? All over the place. They even sing Christmas carols. They'll even, they'll talk about it. They don't care about the birth. Most of them, hey, they accept his life. They accept his death. Talk about the resurrection, they get a little bit freaked out. And that's what Paul, listen, that's what Paul did. So Festus goes, man, this is what they're talking about, some dead guy. And verse 20, and because I was uncertain of such questions, I asked whether he was willing to go to Jerusalem and there be judged concerning these matters. But when Paul appealed to be reserved for the decision of Augustus, I commanded him to be kept till I could send him to Caesar. Oh, something I forgot to tell you. You know who's in charge in Rome? You know who the Caesar is in Rome right now? Not right now, but right now for Paul. You know who's in charge? There's this guy in charge. His name is Nero. Now think about that. You're a Christian and you're appealing to go before Nero? Woo, that's a little risky, isn't it? That's kind of like rolling the dice. So listen, man, he goes, I don't know what to do, but I got to send in there, but I don't have anything to write. What am I going to write? What am I going to do? I'm in a mess. Yeah, because you're a man pleaser, that's why. If you weren't a man pleaser, you wouldn't. That would be my answer to him. If you weren't a man pleaser, you wouldn't be in this mess, so you figure it out. But listen, man, this is crazy. Check this out. Look at verse 22. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I also would like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, he said, you shall hear him. Festus, or Agrippa goes, I want to hear him. And he goes, okay, we'll do this tomorrow. To be continued next week. We're going to stop right here, right? Because I want you guys to come back. Here's what's crazy. Now think about, do you remember way back? Because here's what I want to focus on. We need to rely and remember the promises of God in our life. And we need to understand his promises are sure and God is faithful. Do you remember way back when Ananias came and laid hands on Paul and prayed for him? Remember when he was blind? Do you remember what he told him? You're going to be a witness to the Gentiles, right? And you're going to go to the Gentiles. You remember what else he said? And then you're going to speak to leaders and rulers and kings. Whoa, Paul's going, yeah, come on, Agrippa. I got something to tell you. Is that cool? Now listen, some people, here's what they say. Well, yeah, but Paul had that audible voice and he could count on it. Do you know what you and I have? We got this thing called the Bible. And listen, we got God's promises over and over. I don't have to try and recollect something God said audibly. Every time I get a little freaked out about life, I can open my word and I can read the promises of God for my life. And I can understand that. We have so much more. And you need to understand no matter how wrecked your life is. I don't care, man. I don't care how bad it is. You need to know that God knows exactly where you're at. And he loves you and he cares for you. And he will meet you in that situation. Listen carefully. I'm not saying he's going to take you out of that situation. But he will meet you in that situation. And that's all you need. I ripped this saying off from Don Stewart. Listen, when Jesus is all you have, then Jesus is all you need. And we need to know that, man. We need to be people who rely and remember his promises. And he is faithful. My God told me in his word that he would never leave me and never forsake me. You know what that means? He will never leave me and never forsake me, no matter how bad, how ugly, how horrible it is. He promises that, and God keeps every one of his promises. And that's what I want to encourage us. Look at Paul, and Paul depending on these promises, and he's walking through a minefield of life. I believe, this is a personal opinion, I believe these are 2.5 or whatever years of the worst possible time in Paul's ministry. I think even once he gets to Rome, it's not as bad as this because all of this continued uncertainty. I don't know about you guys, I hate uncertainty, right? That goes along with patience, right? So listen, all through this, and he stayed steadfast and he walked with the Lord. And that's what you and I need to get out of this. And remember the Herod family tree. But remember, man, God is faithful. Let's stand up and pray. As we think about what we've read, Lord, we are amazed looking at this individual, looking at his life and what's going on in his life. And God, I for one, I thank you that I can have in front of me a picture. I can watch and look at somebody else who's done and walking through a horrible, horrible experience. and stay steadfast with you and close to you and have victory in that experience. And Lord, I pray for myself, I pray for those standing with me, that we would learn to trust you. Even when it's dark, even when it's coming undone, even when everything seems to be upside down and backwards and we feel like it's just like we've been forgotten and put on a shelf, I pray that at those moments we would get quiet and we would rely on the promises that you've given us. When we feel like our grip is slipping and coming undone, I pray that we would remember it's not our grip on you, but your grip on us that will see us in the middle of those situations. And Lord, walk with us through those. So God, work in our hearts, especially those who are hurting today. Work and give them that assurance of who you are. And I'm going to ask you to stay in a place of prayer for another couple moments. And you know what? If you're here today and you don't have that relationship with Jesus, a lot of what I just said and even what we just read doesn't make a lot of sense. But that's kind of difficult, and I know you're having difficult understanding that. And here's the problem, man. You need to get born again. Spiritual things are understood by the Spirit. So you need to get born again. So if you've never called on the name of the Lord, today's the day to do that. Call on him, and here's what my Bible says. If you call on his name, you will be saved. The Bible teaches us that we're all sinners. Every single person in here is a sinner. And the wages of sin is death. It separates us from God. That's the bad news. The good news is that Jesus came and died on the cross for you. He died on the cross for me. In other words, we're separated with God. Jesus came and restored that relationship. And now he holds out this freedom from sin and this relationship. And he says, here, all you have to do is trust me, believe me, and call on my name, and your life will be changed. So if you want to do that today, then I'm going to say a prayer. I'm going to try and put it in words for you. You can say this prayer with me. You can say it out loud. You can say it silently, but it's got to come from your heart. You got to mean it sincerely. Maybe you're backslidden. Maybe you're backslidden and you walked into church today and you're thinking, man, what a day to go to church. And it is a good day because you know what? Jesus is calling you home. Come back to Jesus. Come home and let him know. Say this prayer with us and God will hear you. Jesus, today, I confess to you that I am a sinner. And I'm sorry that I sinned against you. And Jesus, I'm asking you right now to forgive me. Thank you for dying for my sin. Jesus, thank you today for your forgiveness. Jesus, come into my heart and change me. Come into my life and guide me. Today, this afternoon, I'm asking you to be my Lord and my Savior.